Welcome, everybody. It is great to have you here. This is beyond COP26 takeaways from the UN Climate Summit. And we are going to be talking with our delegates, the UUA delegates, and also one delegate from Canada who was at Glasgow, and we'll talk about their impressions and takeaways from this conference. And we are going to start with an introduction from Zoe, who is our network coordinator for the UU Young Adults for Climate Change and a member of the 2022 Intergenerational Seminar Planning Committee. Zoe, take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I have our opening words this evening. I'll be sharing a quote from Terry Tempest Williams, an American author. Soul and soil are not separate. Neither are wind and spirit, nor water and tears. We are eroding and evolving at once, like the red rock landscape before me. Our grief is our love. Our love will be our undoing as we quietly disengage from the collective madness of the patriarchal mind that says aggression is the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are going to get right into our topic. Let me say that the UU office at the United Nations has had UNFCCC status, and that stands for the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, status since 2009. 2009 was the Copenhagen Conference, and that was the very significant conference where the nations of the world promised $100 billion a year to developing countries to deal with climate change. And of course, that promise has not been kept. And with that, we will introduce our delegates to the climate conference, and I will let the delegates introduce themselves. So we can start, I think, if I look, we can start with Peggy.
Hi, I'm Reverend Peggy Clark. I'm Senior Minister at Community Church of New York and was a delegate both in Paris and in Glasgow.
Thank you. And Joshua Cooper? Not here. Ati Tovelian.
Yes, my name is Ati Tovelian, and I was attending on behalf of the Canadian Unitarians for Social Justice. I attended the Paris conference, the Marrakesh conference, Madrid conference, and also a conference in Germany, in Munich, not Munich, Bonn, before attending this one.
Oh, thank you. And Caitlin Weddick, I think. Yes, no? Well,
I just let Caitlin in.
Oh,
okay.
Yes, hello.
Okay.
I've attended 7 COPs. I think the first one was in Durban. And I also try to always attend the People's Summit for Climate Justice, which occurs concurrently in the same city as COP, which is an organization, the Climate Justice Conference, the conference of nonprofit organizations and climate justice organizations that are working on the same issues, but from instead of top down, they're working from bottom up.
So would you like to briefly just give us a 1-minute summary of your impressions of Glasgow, of the conference?
It seemed very similar to past conferences. It's extremely busy. There's so much going on at any given time. There are a lot of representatives from the fossil fuel companies and big business, and they're really trying to promote kind of the financial industry. I feel like I'm constantly running into people out of the world of finance. I personally try to attend the events that are being led by indigenous organizations and grassroots organizations from South America and Africa. That was no different. This conference had fewer people of color and fewer people from the global South. It had fewer women. I did notice that at events.
Let's leave it there. We'll come back to
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
All right. Ati, also, just a very brief summary of your impressions of the conference.
Well, I echo the sentiments and the observations of the Climate Action Network representative who spoke at the closing of the COP. I'm actually a member of the Climate Action Network in Canada. The Canadian Unitarians are a member of that. And also the Indigenous Peoples Organization. The NGO representative said this was the most non-inclusive COP ever in the history of the COPs, and the NGO Climate Action Network has been involved from the beginning. The rooms where the events were occurring were often hard to get into. They were often separate. The plenary was almost impossible to get into. There were some tickets given to some people. The Climate Action Network usually distributes a newsletter, but this was not possible at this COP, under the guise of it being a paperless COP. That greatly limited the influence of the NGOs. And the Indigenous Peoples Organization representative praised the fact that there was a mention of Indigenous peoples' rights in several parts of the text, but was very concerned with Article 6, on which I had the chance to be involved in organizing a seminar with regard to private investment on Aboriginal lands. And there's going to be a great deal of rare earth metal extraction happening as a result of the battle against climate change, because those things are required for windmills and solar panels, and there's going to be a lot of earth ripped up in this battle. And the protections that the Indigenous peoples sought really were not included in the text that came out about Article 6. So those are my random observations.
We'll come back to you. And Peggy, your basic observations.
So I hear you're listening, you're looking for just sort of a 60-second, and aside from it being enormous and busy, I would say that this COP was more complicated in a lot of ways. And, it didn't have that sort of, wow, this is a tremendous and exciting success sense of it. It felt more like we were all sort of lagging and dragging and compromising, and it was complicated. And I will say that COVID really changed the mood of the whole thing, so that it was harder to get into things. It was harder to be in things. Rooms were either crowded and frightening or not crowded and felt empty. And it was harder to have access, just didn't have the same open sense that we would have had without that.
Thank you. And let me thank all of you for being at COP. I know many people think that's a great thing to be at, but it's a lot of work. I was at COP25 in Katowice, Poland, and it's not a vacation. it's a lot of hard work. So next, I'm going to ask all of you the same question. Looking at COP26 outcome, where does this put the world in terms of combating climate change and its effects? And Peggy, if you're ready to take that on, we'll start with you.
Sure. So before going into COP, as I understand it, we were looking at a global temperature increase of about 4 degrees or 4.5 degrees. And coming out, we're now looking at 2.8 degrees. So we aren't where we need to be, which would be at 1.5, but we are closer. Now, the other side of this is that is true, but there are two. One is that that's true only if all of the promises made are actually seen to fruition. A lot of promises were made, but a lot of promises have been made many, many times over the years that haven't been fulfilled, even though in this case there was more infrastructure put behind some of those promises. There's still a big if. And it could actually be lower than that if we were to incorporate some of these side agreements that I think that Bill is going to talk about around methane and deforestation. So it could even be as low as 1.8, which gets us even closer. But that's sort of my my sense of where we are, is that we are potentially in a really promising place and that we're really moving in the right direction if the players can be trusted. And that's a very big if.
Great, Jeff. Yes. Ati, how would you answer the question? Looking at COP26, the outcome, where are we, and where does this put the world in terms of combating climate change and its effects?
Well, I think that just in terms of the organization of COP, it was a constructive event. They were able to finish the rule book and have some agreement on many contentious issues, including reporting intervals, and also this contentious Article 6. It was more defined. Aboriginal people were mentioned, so we have a more reliable organization, operative COP organization. The problem is there's just so much to be done. It's like someone said, we're kicking down the can, actually on doing action. We're kicking the can down the road and we're running out of road. So so that's the thing that is really worrisome, that do we have a process that can address the increasing amount of carbon in the atmosphere that's going up at an alarming rate, and the environmental deterioration and the weather events and the fires and so on that are getting worse and worse. And that's and the continued trillions of investment in fossil fuel that's going on in the private sector, independent of what the governments are going to be putting into various funds. So it could have been a lot worse. It could have fallen apart, but it's still a very worrisome scene.
Thank you. And Caitlin, your observations, where are we? Do we have any chance here?
I feel like we need to do more in terms of securing basic ecological services all across the board. That too much emphasis is put on carbon and reducing fossil fuel use, which is important, but it's kind of too narrow a focus. I think the science is more supportive of restorative ecology and kind of methods of having cities and urban areas more self-sufficient in terms of their food production and their water production, their energy production. I would like to see COP going in a very different direction than carbon markets that I feel don't address, aren't a viable solution at all and actually make the problem worse. So I would, I guess it's good that people are still coming together and talking, and I think people from a variety of walks of life get inspired piecemeal here and there. So yeah, check.
Thank you. Joshua Cooper has joined us. Can we get your impressions of COP and where we are as a result?
Hi there.
Hi.
This is Joshua.
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, COP was, of course, a circus in many ways, but was also very positive the way civil society organized and was participating. I believe one of the drawbacks was from the beginning, unfortunately, when we began with the heads of states making speeches, that kept CSOs outside and weren't allowed in the blue zone. And that really made us lose a good 48 hours that, as we know at the end, was very valuable time that we absolutely needed. I also think the major groups and other stakeholders, indigenous, feminist, climate justice for the women, were very active and focused, as well as the climate change and human rights working group, really focusing on Article 6, loss and damages. I think all of those played a crucial role, although didn't get the results as deep and as what we needed to make sure we don't call our home the planet formerly known as Earth. But one thing that was also alarming from the beginning, I think, was the diplomats who supposedly were the champions really did not have their best diplomatic game on when the Action for Climate Empowerment, ACE, actually didn't include human rights. That was really bad. And of course, we can blame Saudi Arabia for taking out a bone saw and cutting that out. But having the UK as the chair and then the US not pushing hard and other states of the EU to keep human rights in, those were just some small technical angles that should have never happened. So there's a whole lot of issues to look at. I am really excited about how Indigenous in the platform have been organizing. That has been extended, so the Indigenous Peoples Platform going forward is good. We have a lot of work to do around Article 6 on loss and damages going forward, including making sure that we include the strong human rights language. The other side I would stress or like to raise is the importance of having the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. It's important to have those now and be able to see what each country is doing. This allows us to organize campaigns similar to what many of us have been doing around either a universal periodic review on human rights at the UN or a voluntary national review with the Sustainable Development Goals. This will allow us to focus on how we can decarbonize and keep track of what the US is doing. I think that'll be important. One thing we can do as well, and I gave a testimony today to the Maui County Council, is doing locally determined contributions, doing an LDC at either the city or the state level. And that way we can ensure that we concentrate on carbon at the local and city level, because that's one of the strengths I saw at the COP. I was fortunate to partner with a county council member and see what ICLE was doing, the group that brings together all the local leaders. And you could really see that they were active at the subnational level to really make sure that we decarbonize. And you could see some of the most creative ideas there. And finally, I think some of the best parts, of course, was I mentioned the People's Plenary and the exciting protest that took place on Friday. But the other was the Fridays for the Future March at the end of the first week, and then the Global Day of Action. Both of those were very amazing to participate and take part in, although it's a little chilly, I have to admit, on the Global Day of Action March for all those hours in that beautiful Glasgow weather. So that's all I want to share, and I'm so excited to hear from my fellow colleagues that also participated, and thank you so much for including me in this conversation. Great to see you, Bruce, again, and it's been a while at the UN.
Yeah, thank you, Joshua. This is very good information. And I'm going to turn this over to Bill McPherson to give us his assessment. But in this next section, I would like to assess, because it's my impression, I mean, obviously governments are in the driver's seat in this. They hold the cards. But my impression is that civil society and indigenous peoples and all of our delegates and everybody else who participated in this had an impact in the outcome. And it might not have been decisive, but I get the feeling that it had a strong influence. So I turn it over to Bill.
Can I just say something before Bill speaks? Can I just say, Bruce, that is actually a huge reality, that all of the other people who were there outside of the parties doing the negotiating, outside of nation states, have tremendous voice in these conversations and are like, I'm grateful that the activists are so unhappy, because that's the role of the activist, and they're in the room saying this isn't enough, right? I mean, the role of faith, the role of civil society in a variety of ways is critical in all of these conversations.
Well, thank you. Obviously, that validates what we do every day at the UN. And we definitely believe that civil society has a role to play and can have an impact and influence on the decisions that are made. And sometimes that's not always visible, but I think it's there. It plays a role. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it over to Bill.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. And I'm going to put a document in the chat that you can go to, so you don't need to take any notes here. I'm going to go through this very quickly, so you have a lot of information. The first thing I want to say is that the final decision had a number of good provisions in it. There were some real compromises, but the final decision has some of the following things. Returning next year with doubling the funding. Now, it also has this language to phase down unabated coal, which was weakening an earlier text that called for phase out of coal. And the unabated was stuck in there also. That means, I guess, carbon capture and storage. And another weasel word was accelerating efforts to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Both of those phrases, accelerating efforts and inefficient, indicate compromise, because there were a number of oil producing countries that didn't want to completely phase out fossil fuel subsidies. But the word inefficient is really open to interpretation. The $100 billion that was mentioned earlier is not going to be available till 2023. That's 3 years later than it was promised. And the Paris rule book was pretty much fixed. I think Adi mentioned this with the common frameworks. And now there will be 10-year targets as well as 5-year targets and more transparency rules. The conference stopped short of accepting the G77 proposal for loss and damage, and agreed only to initiate a dialogue on the issue for future sources, for future talks. Now, there are a number of good side agreements. This one is one of the most significant, I think, ending all future oil and gas production within their borders. So we have 4 countries, France, Sweden, Denmark, and Costa Rica, that have said that, and Portugal, California, and New Zealand. Some people think California is a separate country, I guess. I think that would be great if California enters into all future oil and gas production in its borders. That would be a tough sell to the US as a whole. And then there's this new Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, the BOGA, that's pushing for a global treaty on stopping fossil fuel extraction. Then there were 28 countries that pledged stop financing coal plants. And then there were other philanthropic and research organizations involved, like Bloomberg Philanthropies. I know Michael Bloomberg is behind a lot of the closure of coal plants in the US. Methane, 100 countries agreed to cut methane emissions 30% by 2030. Let me get this full screen, this will be a little easier to read.
Bill, you say all proposed coal plants closed by 2025. Is that a typo?
No, that's what the
the proposed coal plants.
Yeah,
yes.
this is the proposal.
Yeah.
It's not an agreement among governments. It's agreement with the philanthropies.
Right.
It's really a mixture of different things here. I'm throwing together a bunch of different things. Now, here's an interesting one, the zero emissions vehicles. Sell only zero emissions vehicles by 2040 globally and 2035 in leading markets. But the US government did not agree on that. Forest conservation to reverse deforestation by 2030 and provide 19 billion in funding. And international support for fossil fuels, including the United States. And China's already pledged not to build more coal plants. And then this $130 trillion fund, which would actually be spread over 30 years. So that's like 40 billion a year, not 130 billion. It's spread over 30 years to 2050. These are all from the Sierra Club. So I also recommend that everyone read the ENB summary report. ENB stands for the Earth Negotiations Bulletin. And I'll put this link in the chat as well. And here are the topics that they cover: the brief history, the World Leaders Summit, COP, CMA, which stands for the Conference of the Members of the Agreement, that's the Paris Agreement, and CMP, the Conference of the Members of the Kyoto Protocol. They all take place at the same time. Then the subsidiary bodies, the subsidiary body for science and technology advice, and the subsidiary body on implementation. And finally, the closing plenary in which compromises are made. Then the analysis at the end is what ENB does for all of its major reports. I'll put these two links in the chat so you can read up on these much more in detail later.
All right, thank you very much, Bill. So what's next in the UN process? What is needed to move forward in order to get climate justice? And I open that question to all of our participants, Bill and Peggy and Caitlin and Joshua, everybody.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Bruce?
So what's next in the UN process? What's needed to move forward in order to create climate justice? What's our next step?
Well, Bruce, this is COP26. We've had over 30 years of conferences, and the whole time the situation has been getting worse and worse. And the amount of carbon in the atmosphere has just been increasing. Destructive weather events, flooding, wildfires, and so on. So my view is that this is, we're facing a historic challenge to humanity, that we're not going to have a conference and pass a resolution or sign a treaty and solve this problem. This is we need something like what happened with the banning of slavery or what happened with the Industrial Revolution. We didn't have a conference somewhere and decide to reform the society and create a new one. This is something that people just wanted to happen, and societies gradually changed because they were faced with challenges. And we're faced with a big challenge now. There were some hopeful things there at COP. There was a JPI project network where they're talking about integrating cities and universities around Western Europe and other parts of the world, and finding solutions to energy provision and flood control and many other things that contribute to climate change, land use, in farming, and so on. And I think this sort of thing, in which COP probably plays some kind of a catalyst role things like this seem to be happening, especially in Europe and some other parts of the world, which could create a sort of a dynamics in society and a change in society, the way we use energy and our relationship to the earth. But I think this is how it's going to happen. And whether we have another COP or not, I don't think is so significant, because the crisis is so imminent and so real, and touches so many of the people we know, that it's so real and present that it requires a collective a reaction by humanity.
Thank
There's
you.
a biodiversity conference coming up, which I think is also there's a treaty around, which I think addresses more of the threats that face humanity, because this is not only a climate crisis.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. We are actually part of the interfaith community on biodiversity, and that is a very important corollary to climate, because we are losing thousands of species of plants and animals on this planet, and that's not good for our future, and they need to be preserved. So we're working on that as well. The other thing is, I agree. I think the COP is more a response to public pressure rather than a driver of public opinion. And I'd say the biggest advocate for doing something about the climate is the climate itself. It's hitting us with forest fires and floods and droughts and so many experiences, and we can't ignore it anymore. And I think more and more people are beginning to take it seriously, but didn't take it seriously before. Any other thoughts, Peggy?
I'd just like to briefly mention one thing that the COP decision did, which is unique and unusual. It inserted the words coal and fossil fuels for the first time in any UN document that I'm aware of. So that was a real improvement over past documents.
Thank you. It's amazing it took this long to get those words into the document.
So I think that I think there's a lot that we can do and need to do moving forward. And I'm sort of trying to figure out ways of making this simple, but I completely agree with you that COPs don't move public opinion. Public opinion moves COPs. And the more that we are active, engaged, and vocal, the more likely a COP is going to be successful. And the United States is critical in these conversations. So the more we're able to get the attention and show visible support for our State Department and for the administration and their policies, and the more successful they're going to be, the more pressured they're going to feel, the more they're going to want to move things forward. So that part is on us. And I think that as the faith community, we have an obligation and the ability to hold up the ethical, to be the ethical voice in this conversation. I think that's what they look to us for, and it's up to us to do that. I think that's on us. But I also think that there's a way that congregations can do their own micro organizing, because what's happening as climate changes, if we're going to in fact address what's happening, we're going to have to live differently. And if we're going to live differently, we're going to be living in a more hyper-local way. We're going to require our most immediate communities. We're going to have to be relying on each other in different ways, and that's going to congregations are a great place to start that kind of work because the relationships are already there. So we have our own internal adaptation work to do, and I think it's very possible. I think that if we're willing, we could transform our own lives and our own societies even before our government, moves us there, and before state actors figure out what it is that's needed. we can be preparing ourselves in ways that I think actually could be beautiful. I think that what's next really for the world is quite gorgeous. It is possible that it's really terrifying and even violent, looking at wars over water and those kinds of things. But assuming that we address this and we don't end up in the crisis that we've been heading for, I think what's possible is really beautiful. And I think that what we can do is get ready for it.
Could I put in a plug at this point for the Support Local Climate Commitments program at the UU Ministry for Earth? This is in response to a question somebody put in, Teresa Ramsey. What are some solutions at a local level? Will we work on that at Support Local Climate Commitments in the UU Ministry for Earth? And we're having a meeting the first Wednesday of December. And if you go on the UUMFE website, you would find the information for that.
We're encouraging all participants today to create an account at createclimatejustice.net and stay connected and share resources through that link. Joshua, do you have some thoughts? Are you still with us, Joshua? Maybe not. Caitlin?
I was just I posted a link in the chat just now about public banking, but a lot of the problems around climate change are caused by privatized finance, sort of a very private finance for very ugly projects like mining, that I think ultimately maybe I don't even know if sustainable mining or ethical mining can exist. We certainly need to mine things, but I don't know that we found a way to do it in a way that that could be called good. But anyway, public banking and social impact bonds could be created and monitored by public groups using transparent means and guarded by the public. This would also be about not paying back debt owed to fossil fuel companies. So it would change the way we do finance and make money available for localities. So we would be selling social impact bonds. I didn't find an article on that, but I did post the EcoWatch article about the work of public banks to support just transition. Because right now there are private banks and they're allowed to make quite a bit of money loaning money they don't have in order to make money that is privately owned. But public banks could do something similar, only they would be owned by the public and would benefit the public. So it's a really different way of kind of doing banking towards development and changing the direction of development, because people who support public banking will have different objectives than people who support private banking and private finance mechanisms like carbon markets. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that I mean, I would buy social impact bonds and promote those. I think that would be a really cool thing that governments could do. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. You bring up a very important component that we haven't really discussed very thoroughly, but the whole idea of finance and making sure that money goes to sources that you know, or into areas that are going to help us deal with the climate rather than hurt us. And too much money right now is going into endeavors which are hurting the planet, and we need to find ways to change that. I mentioned just a second ago about I'm encouraging people to go to createclimatejustice.net and stay connected. Allison has reminded me that this is a joint campaign of the UU at UN, the UU Ministry for Earth, and UUA's Green Sanctuary program that aims to connect Unitarian Universalist climate action in a network to amplify and support their efforts. And I really want to thank everybody here, and you all come from very different aspects of the climate movement. And the fact that we are all working together, the UU office at the UN, and UU Ministry for Earth, and the UUA Green Sanctuary movement, we are working together in greater and greater harmony. Also, a lot of work together with UUSC. So I really appreciate that. We're kind of getting towards the end. I would like to maybe get some closing remarks from our delegates, or any questions that have come up. Are there, Bill, do you see any questions in the chat that we should address?
I'm aware that Rebecca Allen has her hand up. I don't know how you want to address questions from people.
Sure.
I'll maybe put them in the chat, or I don't know.
Oh, hello. Thank you. I'm Rebecca Allen, and I've watched a lot on COP26 TV and Sky News, and I posted on the new Slack that you're talking about some conversation about youth. There were some good panels about youth asking questions and talking about climate forward food as a major topic. And so I put a couple of links in that I think we can do when you're talking about action now. One, today we can go plant-based. And two, we can sign petitions. And three, education. We still have a lot of people who are not aware. And so I just thought I would say education is still important. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Any other questions or thoughts?
I regret that Daphne Winsome isn't here, because one of the interesting experiences I had at COP was to find that we had both been working on a scientist warning initiative, and Daphne was a contributor to the last the scientist warning to humanity, which came out on the last day of COP. And there was a lot of things raised in there, such as the importance of local economies. And the central thing that I was going to mention that also relates to the Interfaith Talanoa Dialogue post-COP paper is the problem that we have about measuring wealth related to GDP. That's the way we measure wealth. And it's a very destructive way. And all the countries in the world use that in their relations with the World Bank and the IMF and so on. And we don't seem to be able to get rid of it. And especially now after the COVID, we have these budgets, and we built huge deficits. Both Europe and the United States have gone over 100% of their GDP. And so there's going to be more and more desperate efforts to pay down that debt somehow, because we don't know how to get rid of it. And we're trying to build the economy at 2% a year or 3% a year. Well, we used to be in the financial business. That means in 35 years, the GDP of the humanity will be twice as big as it's now. And by the time our children are retirement age, it'll be 400%. And look at what the footprint of the human population is doing to the planet now. It's just a mad way to look at the future and try to build a future by destroying the planet. If you have time, have a look at Daphne's paper. And this is also echoed the problem with the counting wealth with GDP, also in the Talanoa interfaith paper that came out after COP.
We definitely invited Daphne. She's driving to Portland, according to an email that we got, and so it isn't able to be with us. But yeah, that's very important. And the whole issue of finance and how we calculate things, and where we say, when we say we're in debt and when we're not in debt, and what debt means. I think we need to rethink a lot of that, and certainly spending the money that we need to deal with climate change is absolutely vital to our survival. And the resistance to spending that money and doing the necessary things, it just seems to be, this is our future. This is our life. This is the future of our children and our planet, and we definitely need to do what's necessary to deal with that, including spending the money that's necessary
to save the most valuable capital that we have, which is much more valuable than financial capital.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? And we're kind of coming into winding up, so if you've got final thoughts or final conclusions, this is the time to kind of let us know.
My final thought is that for me, there was something incredibly exciting about this COP. Last time I was at COP was in Paris, and in Paris, we had to fight to get any sense of urgency. Getting the idea of 2.0 was a big deal, and not everybody was willing to say that we needed to stay at 2 degrees. And showing up here was so different. The energy was so different. The urgency was real, and it was expected. Everyone got that this was a crisis. It didn't feel at all like we were convincing people something had to be done. Everyone showed up knowing something had to be done. And really 1.5 was, I'm not saying that every country, I mean, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, I mean, not everybody was jumping on board, but it was expected that 1.5 is actually where we needed to be. There was a different kind of energy. So for me, it felt there was, when I first arrived, a huge sigh of relief. Like there were fights that we fought before and won without anyone really noticing that we won them. We have just shifted the conversation. So my closing remarks are that I think we're actually in a better place than we think we are.
Thank you. Allie Tharp has reminded me that Daphne Winston was one of our delegates, and her work in climate change, actually all of our delegates, everybody here, Peggy and Ati and all of the delegates that we were able to send are really giants in this movement and have been working on climate. Going to Glasgow was not the first rodeo they've been to. They've been working on climate issues for a long, long time. And, we're very grateful that they continue to do this work. And as I said earlier in the opening remarks, having been to COP25 in Poland, it's no party. It's hard work. It's tiring. It's frustrating. It's all kinds of things. And I really admire the people that have done the work prior and post and during these COPs to really make a difference there. And Daphne certainly is one of them. And we do miss her in this particular discussion because she has a lot to offer, but she's written quite a bit. You can definitely go online and see the things that she's written, and we'll certainly include her on a future message. So any other sort of closing remarks at this point? Joshua, I keep asking if Joshua is still around. I don't know if he's gone. I think he's gone. Okay. Caitlin.
I'm continually disappointed by what our leaders do, but I want to say that I'm always impressed by some of the grassroots action and what we can do at our own congregations and in our own communities. Some of the things that happen at COP that go unnoticed that we never know about, I always give this example because I heard about it at my first COP, but a major environmental organization leader met with some Indian guru that had 2.3 million followers on Instagram, and boom, the next day, all those people were changing several aspects of their lives that, made things more, that, are more sustainable or environmental in some way. And I just, I feel good about some of the changes that we're doing, the actions that we're taking, that even if the governments aren't taking steps in climate reparations the way they should, or making, really commitments that have teeth and that really are not blah, blah, blah. That even if they're not doing the work, I feel like there's so many people who are doing the work that I feel inspired by that. And that our best hopes are around democratic reforms and equitable, devolving decision-making, really empowering our localities to make those changes that are more sustainable, that maybe aren't being led from the top down. So that's the positive and encouraging thing I want to share.
Thank you. Peggy mentioned earlier about the idea of faith, and I'm a trustee of the Parliament of the World's Religions. And the Parliament has a very dynamic climate task force, which has been extremely effective. And that is supported by all of the faith traditions that are part of the Parliament, which is basically every faith tradition you can think of. The other part that is very important, I think, are the indigenous peoples. And they are very active in this fight. And I think we are learning to learn more from indigenous peoples, because I think they have a lot of answers. I've done a lot of reading recently about the civilizations of this continent, which includes North America and Central America, Mexico and South America. They were actually very good in land management and water management. They manage crops and their ecosystem much better than we are today. And many of the techniques that they used back then, long before white people came to this side of the world, we could go back to those methodologies of land management and water management, and learn a lot from them. And the fact that indigenous people are involved, I think, is very important. Ati.
Well, it's getting to be 3:30 in the morning because I'm here in Finland, stuck because of this COP. So I don't think I'm able to find many more coherent utterances, except I'm not sure if I'll go to any more COPs or not, but I have a feeling I can do other effective things on the environmental crisis, knowing there are folks like you around to work with, and knowing that and having talked to you now leads me to think that we can probably be that significant group that Margaret Mead talks about, a small group that makes a difference and can do a lot of things by working with other people. So in some context like that, I hope we'll meet again soon, maybe around the UUs, if not at COP.
I hope so. I hope that's the message that we've all taken from this and continue to take, is that all of us can play our part. A lot of it is what we eat, what we do in our own lives, how we decide to live more gently on the planet. It also has to do with our relationships and our connections to other people within our congregations and across into other faith traditions, and the alliances that we can make. And, and the change, I think the message that I'm hearing from this discussion is a lot of the change that we need is not going to come from governments. I mean, there will be some changes from governments that are important, but a lot of those changes need to come in our own behaviors and in our connections and in our ability to influence others within our own faith tradition, but also across faith traditions and other faith traditions. And, working, on an interfaith basis, which is what we do at the United Nations, Religions for Peace and the Parliament of the World's Religions, I can't think of any faith tradition that's not on board with working on climate change. Laudato Si, the papal encyclical on climate, is a wonderful document.
How about the Taliban?
Well, all right. There might be one or two faith traditions that are accepted. But, the Buddhists, the Jains, the Hindus, the Catholics, and so many Protestant denominations. And the Taliban is not a member of the Parliament of the World's Religions, so I don't run into them. But most of the other faith traditions and Muslims, I mean, we have lots of Muslims in our work, and they work very hard on this. So, and certainly I hope we all understand that the Taliban does not represent mainstream Islam, because most Muslims are working very assiduously. And Islam has a very strong tradition, as many of our traditions have, that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the earth and to take care of it. And the Prophet Muhammad said cutting down a tree is forbidden. I mean, you know, particularly being in a desert environment, the idea of cutting down a tree was anathema to the Prophet Muhammad. And so I wish we had all heeded that lesson. I have a personal love of forests and trees, and I have seen so many forests cut down. I've seen old growth trees in Africa cut down to be sent for charcoal in Europe. And it hurts my heart to see that. These are ancient trees, and these are carbon sinks. Our forests are what can save us. And and I'm glad that this COP mentioned forests. I wish there was more content on forests, but forests are really important. So that will be my final comment on this. Any further things? I think we're coming to an end. Ali Tharp, do you want to say a last word? I know you're here. I know I'm putting you on the spot. Maybe she's already gone. All right, well, we'll close it up here. We've gone through our time. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for your personal commitment to working on these very important issues. And let's continue to be in touch with each other and stay informed, and let's inform each other. We all have different sources of information. The more we talk together, the more we learn from each other, and the more we can solve these problems together and make a difference. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.